You spend so much time explaining yourself because somewhere deep down, you still believe you have to earn people's understanding. You tell them why you made that decision, why you said what you said, why you walked away, as if your life needs to make sense to someone else before it can make sense to you. But it doesn't. The truth is, people who want to misunderstand you will find a reason to, no matter how carefully you explain. Your worth isn't a debate, it's a fact. And when you start treating it like a fact, the need to explain yourself starts to fade. Confidence begins where explanation ends because you're no longer performing for validation. Validation is addictive because it feels like approval. You post something, you speak up, you take a stand, and you wait for the reaction. You want someone to nod, to agree, to make you feel that what you did was right. But here's the problem. When you rely on that, you hand over the control of your peace to people who were never meant to hold it. Every time you explain your worth to someone who doesn't value it, you reinforce the idea that they have the power to decide what you're worth. They don't. You do. And the more you understand that, the quieter your explanations become, not because you're cold or careless, but because you've outgrown the need to be seen through someone else's eyes. You don't need to explain your kindness, your silence, or your distance. Some people will call it arrogance. Others will call it maturity. Let them. Because the people who know you, truly know you, don't require a verbal map to your intentions. They trust your character enough to read between the lines. They've seen your consistency, and consistency always speaks louder than explanations. You don't convince people with words, you remind them with actions. That's what integrity looks like, doing what aligns with your values, not what satisfies someone's curiosity. The hardest part about not explaining yourself is that it feels rude at first. You think silence will make you look guilty or defensive. But silence is not guilt. Silence is grace. It's the art of knowing when your energy is better spent on peace instead of persuasion. You are not here to fix someone's perception of you. That's their responsibility, not yours. And sometimes the most confident thing you can do is walk away mid-conversation because you've realized it's not a dialogue. It's a defense. When you stop explaining, you stop defending, and when you stop defending, you finally start living. People will always have opinions, and that's fine. Opinions are cheap. They cost nothing to make and even less to throw around. But your time, your peace, and your focus, those are expensive. They're priceless. So spend them wisely. Don't trade your emotional energy for temporary approval. You don't have to explain why you chose peace over drama, why you said no instead of yes, or why you prioritized yourself for once. Growth doesn't always look like explanation. Sometimes it just looks like silence. The day you realize your worth isn't up for discussion is the day you become free. Free from people's opinions, free from overthinking, free from explaining yourself into exhaustion. Because explaining is often just an apology in disguise, an apology for being yourself, for doing what feels right, for not fitting into someone's idea of who you should be. You don't owe that to anyone. Your choices are your truth, not a courtroom statement waiting for approval. And when you stop apologizing for who you are, you start stepping into who you're meant to be. You don't need validation to exist confidently in your truth. You just need presence. Presence in your decisions, presence in your boundaries, presence in your silence. Every time you choose not to explain, you're choosing yourself. You're saying, I trust me enough to let this be misunderstood. That's power, because understanding will catch up eventually. But peace is something you can't delay anymore. So stop explaining, start living, and let your calm confidence do the talking. You think explaining yourself will make people see your side, that if you just say the right words, they'll finally understand your intentions. But that's the trap, because most of the time, you're not explaining to create understanding, you're explaining to calm your own discomfort with being misunderstood. And that's where the energy drain begins. You replay the conversation in your head, wondering if you said too much or too little, trying to find the sentence that would have changed their mind. But no amount of explaining can make someone see what they're not ready to see. The more you explain, the more power you give away, and the emptier you feel afterward. Explaining doesn't always bring clarity, Sometimes it brings confusion. You stretch your words, soften your tone, and overthink your message until it no longer sounds like you. You're trying so hard to be understood that you forget the point of the conversation was never to perform, it was to express. You start editing your emotions to sound reasonable because somewhere inside you believe being reasonable makes you acceptable. But peace doesn't live in over-explanation. It lives in knowing that your truth doesn't need to be dressed up for anyone. When you stand firm in that truth, you protect your mental space from being drained by endless justifications. Every explanation you give to someone who's not listening is a withdrawal from your emotional bank. It costs you focus, confidence, and calm. Think about how many times you've left a conversation mentally exhausted, not because of what was said, but because of how much energy it took to defend yourself. You could have used that same energy to grow, to build, to rest, to love. But instead, you spent it trying to prove something to someone who didn't care to understand it. That's the real loss. Not the misunderstanding, but the energy it took to fight it. When you realize that, you start choosing silence not as avoidance, but as protection. You don't owe everyone a play-by-play of your decisions. If you made a choice that brings you peace, you don't need to turn it into a PowerPoint presentation just to make others comfortable with it. Some people aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for control. They want to test if your confidence is solid or if it depends on their approval. That's why you have to be careful who you give explanations to. Not everyone deserves access to your reasoning, because some people only want to use it against you. The more you explain, the more they dissect your words, searching for something to twist. Protect your peace from those conversations by recognizing when it's no longer about clarity, but control. Explaining yourself over and over again is like pouring water into a leaking bucket. No matter how much effort you put in, it'll never be enough for someone who's determined not to hold what you're saying. You'll keep pouring until you realize it's not your job to fix the hole. You were never meant to make people believe in your choices. You were meant to stand by them. Real peace begins when you stop chasing understanding and start embracing acceptance. Acceptance that not everyone will get it, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need to make sense to everyone to live a meaningful, peaceful life. When you stop explaining, you stop performing for people who don't value the show. You reclaim your time, your focus, your calm. You begin to understand that your energy is sacred, and not everyone has earned a piece of it. You learn to respond with silence where you once would have launched into a full explanation. That silence doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. It means you've learned that peace is worth more than being right. You've learned that understanding yourself is a far greater reward than convincing someone else to. Every time you feel the urge to explain, pause and ask yourself, who am I doing this for? Am I trying to help them understand? Or am I trying to avoid the discomfort of being misunderstood? Because that discomfort is temporary, but the peace that comes from holding your ground lasts much longer. Stop pouring energy into arguments that only lead to exhaustion. Stop explaining yourself to people who've already made up their minds. You don't need to drain yourself to prove your truth. You just need to stand in it quietly, firmly, and without apology. When someone questions your actions, your first instinct is often to defend yourself. You want to clear the air, correct their misunderstanding, and prove your intentions were good. But every time you jump to defend yourself, you give their opinion a level of importance it doesn't deserve. Silence, on the other hand, does something powerful. It unsettles assumptions and shifts control back to you. Silence doesn't mean you're weak or that you agree. It means you've chosen not to waste your peace explaining something that doesn't require proof. There's a quiet strength in letting your composure do the talking. It says, I know my truth, without uttering a single word. Defense often sounds like desperation when it's given to the wrong audience. You start explaining your side, but the person listening isn't trying to understand. They're trying to win. They twist your words, interrupt your reasoning, and act like your calmness is arrogance. And so you speak faster, louder, hoping that if you just find the right words, they'll stop misjudging you. But silence works differently. It doesn't feed the argument. It doesn't negotiate with chaos. It simply stands there, grounded, calm, unbothered, and that's what makes it so powerful. Silence communicates confidence in a way no defense ever could. You don't always have to respond to every false story told about you. The people who truly know you don't need explanations, and the ones who don't will believe what they want anyway. Let them. Because when you start defending yourself against every opinion, you end up living for the noise instead of the truth. Silence teaches you to value peace over perception. It reminds you that your purpose is not to be understood by everyone, but to stay aligned with what you know is right. The less you explain, the more you realize that not every misunderstanding deserves your time. There's a maturity that comes with learning when to speak and when to stay quiet. It's not about holding grudges or ignoring confrontation. It's about understanding that not every battle is worth fighting. Some situations only exist to drain you, and your silence is the way out. When you stop reacting, people start revealing who they really are. The ones who seek truth will ask calmly. The ones who seek drama will provoke loudly. Silence filters them both. It keeps you from saying things you'll regret and from engaging in conversations that go nowhere. Silence isn't avoidance, it's mastery of self-control. Silence is also the language of confidence. You'll notice the strongest people rarely rush to defend themselves. They know that time exposes truth better than words ever will. While others waste energy on arguments, they focus on living in a way that eventually makes their point for them. That's the thing about silence. It's patient. It doesn't argue, but it always reveals. When you stand still long enough, people start seeing what words tried to explain. And in that stillness, you reclaim all the energy you used to spend on proving yourself. Defense often comes from insecurity, the fear that being misunderstood means being wrong. But misunderstanding is part of life. You can't control what others choose to see, but you can control how you respond. When you choose silence, you're not giving up. You're leveling up. You're saying, I won't fight for recognition when I already know my value. That mindset changes everything. It stops you from getting pulled into unnecessary battles and allows you to walk through conflict without losing your composure. The loudest thing about a calm person is their peace. So when people misjudge you, let them. When they question you, let them. When they try to provoke a reaction, give them silence. Not as a weapon, but as wisdom, because silence doesn't defend you. It defines you. It says you've outgrown the need to prove, the need to explain, the need to be seen a certain way. And over time, that silence becomes louder than any defense you could have made. It speaks for you, it protects you, and most importantly, it keeps your energy exactly where it belongs, with you. There's a huge difference between wanting to be understood and wanting to be approved of. When you seek understanding, you're sharing your truth with clarity and confidence. When you seek approval, you're adjusting your truth to make it more acceptable. And that's where most people lose themselves, in the constant rewriting of who they are just to be liked, accepted, or validated. You don't need everyone to agree with your choices. You just need a few who genuinely understand them. Approval is temporary because it's based on preference, but understanding is lasting because it's built on respect. When you stop chasing approval, you start finding peace in authenticity. People often mistake disagreement for disapproval, but they're not the same. Someone can disagree with you and still respect your decision. But when you're trapped in approval seeking, every disagreement feels like rejection. You start second-guessing yourself, changing your tone, editing your behavior just to fit someone's comfort zone. You end up living in a constant state of performance, hoping someone will clap for who you've become, even if it's not really you. That's not connection. That's compliance. Real connection doesn't require you to shrink. It allows you to show up fully, even when others don't completely get it. When you prioritize approval, your peace depends on other people's moods. One compliment can lift you, and one criticism can break you. You give everyone around you emotional access to your confidence. But when you prioritize understanding, you reclaim that control. You understand that not everyone has the capacity to see your vision, and that's okay. Some people will never get your choices because they're not meant to. Your path was built from your experiences, your pain, your lessons, not theirs. Stop handing over your peace to people who haven't walked your road. Approval is earned by performance. Understanding is earned by truth. The people who truly understand you will ask questions instead of making assumptions. They'll listen before they judge. They won't force you to explain every detail just to feel comfortable with your choices. Those are the people worth keeping close, the ones who value who you are, not just what you can provide. You don't need to bend your truth for them because they see you clearly. But for everyone else, you have to learn to let misunderstanding exist. You're not responsible for teaching everyone your heart. You're responsible for protecting it. Understanding grows in trust. Approval grows in control. Choose wisely where you invest your energy. Chasing approval often comes from old habits, from wanting to be liked, from fearing rejection, from believing peace comes when everyone's happy with you. But peace doesn't come from pleasing people. It comes from pleasing purpose. And purpose doesn't always make sense to others. Sometimes your growth will confuse people who are used to your old patterns. Sometimes your silence will bother people who depended on your explanations. And that's okay. You're not being cold. You're being clear. You've learned that you can't build inner peace on outer validation. Approval fades, but understanding sustains. When you shift from seeking approval to seeking understanding, your conversations change. You stop oversharing to be accepted. You stop explaining decisions that don't need to be justified. You stop apologizing for evolving. You begin to speak with calm conviction instead of nervous explanation. You start to see that those who truly want to understand will meet you halfway, and those who don't, won't. That realization frees you from trying to fix perceptions that were never yours to manage. Understanding requires empathy. Approval requires control. You deserve more empathy in your life, not more control over it. At some point, you have to decide which matters more, being liked or being real, because you can't have both all the time. Choosing understanding means letting go of the need to please and stepping into the freedom of honesty. It means saying, I'm okay if you don't get it, and truly meaning it. When you reach that level of calm confidence, you stop performing for applause and start living for alignment. You stop chasing the temporary comfort of being liked and start embracing the permanent peace of being understood. And in that peace, you finally find yourself again. Protecting your peace isn't about isolating yourself from the world. It's about choosing what and who gets access to your energy. Too many people mistake kindness for availability. They assume because you're calm, you're open, and because you're patient, you'll tolerate anything. But peace without boundaries isn't peace. It's exhaustion in disguise. Boundaries don't make you selfish. They make you self-aware. They remind you that not every argument needs your response. Not every request needs your yes, and not every person deserves your constant explanation. When you start drawing those lines, you stop living reactively and start living intentionally. The truth is, peace isn't something you find, it's something you protect. It's a daily decision to filter what enters your mind and what stays out. Without boundaries, everyone gets a piece of you, your time, your energy, your focus, until there's nothing left for yourself. That's why saying no is powerful, not because it shuts people out, but because it keeps your center strong. A boundary says, this is where my peace ends and your chaos begins. It's a silent line that protects your sanity from being drowned in someone else's noise. You don't owe an explanation for the lines you draw to keep your peace intact. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call you difficult when you start setting them. They'll say you've changed, that you've become distant or cold, but what's really happening is you've stopped giving free access to your energy. You've stopped explaining why you need space, why you're saying no, why you're done overextending. You're not cold, you're clear. Clarity is a form of peace that doesn't require permission. Once you start choosing clarity over chaos, you realize that the people who truly care will respect your limits without needing long explanations. Boundaries aren't about walls, they're about filters. A wall blocks everything, but a filter lets the good in and keeps the unnecessary out. That's how peace works. It's not about living in silence or cutting everyone off. It's about choosing what aligns with your energy and letting go of what doesn't. You can still be kind and have boundaries. You can still care deeply and choose distance. The two can coexist because peace isn't the absence of connection. It's the presence of balance. You can only give your best when you're not constantly drained by trying to explain why you need rest, quiet, or space. When you protect your peace with boundaries, you start noticing how much lighter life feels. You stop carrying other people's emotions like they're your responsibility. You stop apologizing for taking time to recharge. You stop feeling guilty for not being available 24/7. You realize that your peace is not a luxury, it's a necessity. The more you honor that truth, the stronger you become internally. You no longer need validation for your decisions because your boundaries have already made your priorities clear. Peace becomes your baseline, not a temporary break from chaos. There's a quiet power that comes from enforcing boundaries without anger. You don't need to shout to be firm. You don't need to explain to be understood. Boundaries are not for others to agree with. They're for you to stand by. When you hold them consistently, people learn how to treat you. They either adjust or drift away, and either outcome protects your peace. That's the beauty of boundaries. They naturally reveal who values your presence and who only valued your compliance. You stop chasing people to stay and start trusting that peace attracts what's meant for you. Your peace is your responsibility, and no one else will protect it for you. So when something threatens it, whether it's a toxic conversation, an emotional manipulator, or your own overthinking, pause and remember what you've built. Don't let guilt break the boundaries that peace helped you create. You've worked too hard to stay calm in a world that feeds on reaction. Guard that calm. Keep your circle small, your standards high, and your boundaries firm. Because the more you protect your peace, the more your life aligns with purpose, clarity, and quiet confidence.